But I do want to cover a little over some mild media planning within data analytics that will be really important for you to understand in terms of what you can actually get out of this. So this will include some data that I have from one of my organizations that I help run for my social media strategies class, which is an undergrad class for an event we run. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what is reach and what are impressions. So if you haven't taken a class in media planning, it's not a big deal. I want to cover over it, but I'm going to cover over it on Monday, mainly because I don't have screen capture on my laptop. I have it on my desktop in the office, so I won't be able to show that until Monday. However, so that will be Wednesday's lecture. Today's lecture for Tuesday is going to be about what's called a SMART plan. And this will be part of what you might want to consider doing for your final project. So this will actually mean going in to do a little research based on the brand that you're representing right now. And then I'm going to turn this because this light is bugging me. And then what you're going to do is you are going to go in, analyze how they're doing things, and then from there, being able to come up with a SMART plan of your own based on how to help their social media. So I want to talk about that. It's not going to be a particularly long lecture, so don't worry. It won't be like my last one. But it is important, and it is something that needs to be discussed in terms of the strategies that you would use for strategic communication. And these should always be at least talked about, whether you use them or not, which most students I've known that have gone into social media advertising has told me that SMART plans exist outside of what we talk about here in academia. So that is something that's major in terms of planning. But before I do that, one last thing I'll mention. I put up 2 readings on As You Learn. They're both by an author named Bazarova. I always mix that up. Bazarova, and she is brilliant. She talks quite a lot about social media in general, but one of the articles hones in on Facebook specific. And a lot of this will have to do with disclosure as well as social judgment. And it'll talk about how we react when we are approached with a message, either by ourselves or somebody else. So they talk about acceptance states for people who are posting and they read posts that they wrote versus reading posts that other people have wrote. And so this gets into a lot of things within neurotransmitters in your brain of feeling happy about oneself versus feeling upset. And you'll see some of the data. They'll talk a lot about seeing other Facebook people's posts actually brings us down a little bit. Whereas, our Facebook post, especially the memories are a big tool in this, kind of releases that nostalgia, if you will, the dopamine that is associated with nostalgia, and actually gives us that motivational sense to keep doing things, and that you feel a little bit more upbeat because of it. So read through those, and don't worry if you don't understand some of the statistics. You don't necessarily have to. If you have any questions about it, let me know, but really focus on the intro, the lit review, and the discussion in terms of what's being said, because that's going to be major in there. Okay. So, again, this is not going to take too long, but I do want to talk a little bit about SMART goals. And SMART goals, so this is a part of the pragmatic area of using social media for advertising purposes. And within your SMART goal, SMART is an acronym. So it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timeliness. And all this is supposed to be how we plan our year within using social media. It also talks a little bit about what we need to do as far as timeliness, which we'll talk a little about, especially when we get into issue and crisis communication, of how much is it of the essence that time has to be involved with social media. And this is a major component within New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott, in terms of making sure you have what's called a real-time strategy. for being able to answer anything that comes your way. So let's talk about this. First and foremost is specific. So the first letter within the SMART is specific. And it's the more specific you can be with writing down a goal, the easier it will be to clearly see what it is you're trying to achieve. Maybe your example is a goal to grow your Twitter followers, which that seems can be kind of a vague, a vague goal. Where you can specify this is you may go one step further and say, I want to make sure I increase my Twitter following for this group of audience. So how do I do that? Through what we know within social media advertising. One thing you can do is look into search engine optimization. If you're using Twitter, for instance, the use of hashtags really goes a long way, especially if you're using them at the right time. I'm going to show you next week Twitter data that I have on my page. I don't care if I show. But the big thing I'll show you is that some of this stuff that you're looking at when you're looking through Twitter data, you'll be able to recognize which patterns work the most in terms of what's being posted to what audience. So you might notice when you go through Facebook, for instance, so if you're posting on Facebook, you will probably have an attended audience for each particular post. So let's say you're really into the NCAA basketball tournament and you want to post about that. You know that all of your friends might not be a fan of the team that you like or might not be a fan of basketball at all. And if they're not, you will probably realize to an extent that those people are not going to be really paying attention. So that post isn't for them. So maybe when we're talking, and hashtags can reflect that. So when we're trying to get a very particular audience's attention, we're going to use the appropriate hashtags. On Twitter, we're going to use the appropriate handles that will get people to come to us. This also has to do with frequent posting. So if you notice on Twitter, now granted, I post a lot about video games. The reason I do that is, one, I like video games, but the other is I really want to establish my audience, which in this case, especially for the projects that I work on, are a large video game audience. So I want them to be able to see the posts that I'm delivering so that they may be able to participate in some of the research that we're doing. And, if we get a friend every now and again with it, that's awesome too. We've met some really cool people along the way. So that's a third reason. Probably should be more important than the second one. But, we do utilize this as a tool for conducting research. And this is, again, one of the reasons why I post a lot about video games is because I really want to work with that audience specifically. So that's a specificity thing. So that's your first one, is specific. The next one is measurable. So how will you measure success? Maybe I want to double the number of my Twitter followers. Most of these will be either run by quarters or by the year, typically by the year, when advertisers usually construct their media plan, although they separate it by quarters or by month at least. It is a year-long plan. So the measurable will probably talk about first, how many tweets or Facebook messages did I produce last year? How many people subscribed? How many people liked? How many people followed me on any specific platform? And what can I do from there? So again, maybe within the business that you're looking at, you may say, how could I get my followers to double based on, again, measured metrics? And part of this can actually work with some of the same things. So we can look at SEO. We can look at more specific posting. We can look into, sorry, I lost my train of thought. We can look at sharing other people's content because one of the coolest things about the market within social media specifically, and this is research that I've done with YouTube, is that it's a very collaborative area where many people work together to create content and bring something up. This is happening in Twitch TV as well, what they call raids. I'll talk later into that when we get into some streaming stuff. Excuse me, so sorry. The other one is it attainable? So is your goal attainable? Can you realistically double the number of your Twitter followers? Think about this in terms of what we're able to do realistically. Because many of us, especially within social media, we have these high hopes about what we plan to do. I hope when realizing going through your blog, you will probably not have a lot of people to start off with. It takes a long time for most people to have such a significant market of people to pay attention to your stuff. So this is why when a YouTuber or social media influencer or content creator or somebody that's a blogger, whatever, when one of them gets out on the market real quick and develops an audience real quick, that attainability actually skyrockets into saying what we can and can't do, because there have been some YouTube channels that have exploded onto the scene. And what I mean by that is they have been on a short period of time, they produce really good content, and all of a sudden this mass of people have started to pay attention to it. So what I would consider, I've been on this YouTube channel for 2 years now. My attainability is probably pretty low. Now, I don't make a real active, I don't make myself real active in terms of promoting my YouTube channel. There's not much need. But I do help with another organization that I do work a little bit in their analytics and saying, what can we do to promote them more? And what's popular? So this is another thing where we talk about it in attainable, and I'd really encourage you to do this in your midterm as well as your final project, is saying what's working for them and what's not. That's actually easy analytics to look into, because you can look at things through likes and comments and so forth. One thing that the business I work for is they have a special session that they like to produce with guest panelists. And that seems to be the biggest audience stream that they get. This is the biggest audience that they attain for this. So I can say, okay, maybe for this particular content, I'm going to be experimenting, but with the guest participation, I know what I'm getting into. So I can say, we're going to double our content based on this. And that goes back into specificity and measurement. Relevance, which is the R, so we've gone through specific, measurable, attainable, and now we're into relevant. So relevance is a relevant goal, is assigned closely to your business objectives. Does this goal support your business objective, vision, or values? Match is going to be key here. So let's say you want to work with a social media influencer. A match is going to be very strong in terms of what you're selling. If it's not, then people are going to sit there and go, why are you using this? So there's actually a lot of data that supports, especially with corporate social responsibility. So if you've done any work within PR or heard of corporate social responsibility, a lot of the work is big organizations working with non-government organizations or NGOs, which means they partner with them. So, like the Make-A-Wish Foundation is the NGO that one of the organizations that I belong to works with. And it works because Make-A-Wish is very much embedded into our mission statement. So you can look at organizations on social media and say who are they paired with and why are they paired with them. So that's where relevance comes in. Match is major when it comes to being able to advertise in general, especially when it comes to trying to link something. So I'll give you an example. Domino's, for instance. Now, this isn't social media per se. Did a CSR campaign where they were talking about potholes, which the first time I heard that, I was like, potholes? That's weird. Until they really got to start to think about it. They made this line between two things. One is potholes, one is Domino's pizza. So I'm like, okay, improving potholes. That sounds great. I would love my potholes fixed in my road, but what's the point of this really? So what they did was they said, all right, we've got delivery vehicles that go through roads all the time, and we have to deal with potholes, and we don't want your pizza flipping over, which you might say, oh, that's a little far-fetched. Depending on where you are in the country, those potholes, I visit my wife's family in Buffalo about once a year now, and those potholes will submerge your car. So, but again, this is where match comes in, and they make that match happen. And so that's where relevancy comes in. It might also have to do with relevancy of the time, which gets into our last one, which is time specific. So give your goal a deadline in terms of how much time we have. Now, so this may be double my Twitter followers in the number of 3 months. Again, usually it's a year, but it can also be within a quarter or something like that. Now, a major consideration, and this is really important too, is not only timeliness with the span that you have your social media encounter, but also you might want to consider the time in what's going on in the news. This is, again, approaching something called newsjacking, which essentially is anything that's going on to the news that we can incorporate our brand, we can use. Now that it can be tricky because sometimes when you do that, especially with hashtags, you can get in a lot of trouble if you're doing the hashtags wrong. I've already talked about that. But it can be something that you can use to your benefit. And that's where time specific comes in. So maybe I know that there's an event coming up. So, if I am, if I'm, I'll give you a good example within craft beer. If I know specific events are going to deal with craft beer, I can say my followers are going to reach an attainable measurement based on an event. So maybe it's Oktoberfest that I want to do that. So the time specific thing is Oktoberfest. I know this event is happening and I want to promote my brand then. So again, it can be within the cycle, within a year, but it also can be based on a contingency fund. So when you're looking at things like media planning, for instance, you always want a contingency fund within your budget to make sure that you have enough money in case something happens. So we see this a lot with like United Airlines. United Airlines has always been a little bit under heat for not responding when things happen. So the passenger being pulled off the plane, to a lesser extent, the United Airline that broke a gentleman's guitar, not on purpose, but by accident, but still didn't do anything to replace it, didn't do anything to refund it, and so they went online onto YouTube, created a song called United Breaks Guitars. You can look that up. It's really funny. But what happens is, how do you respond? What do you do? And this is an area where I know many of you will sit there and say, I don't use social media a lot. However, this is a case where if you're not responding right away, it doesn't matter if you use social media a lot. There is going to be a public perception about your brand that is inescapable. And it's even more inescapable when you don't do anything. Because if your voice isn't heard online, it's practically not out there in the first place. So again, I realize the demographic and where we can be, but it is something that still rings important regardless of the age demographic. And when we, when we get in tomorrow's lecture, when I talk about data from our for our particular organization, I'm going to show you a couple of charts that actually show within this particular region, Boone, Banner Elk, Blowing Rock, West Jefferson, Hickory, Lenore, where we've done some geo-demographic advertising, who's paying attention to it the most. And so be on the lookout for that because, again, it should be really informative. I'm going to show you another website that actually looks at some of your Facebook advertising. That's really, really cool. But this will get into a little bit of how you do social media advertising in general. So, okay, that's going to be my last lecture for today. Don't bite all of this at once. Give it time to sit. But check out those Bazarova articles. They're very important. They're also really informative. As well as keep going through the reading, especially that last one. If you read nothing else, get that last one. It is a heavy read, but it is also very informative, and it'll help you out with your blog posts. So thanks all, and I will talk to you soon.